The U.S. President Donald Trump is yet to come to terms with the victory of former Vice President Joe Biden in the presidential election, and is actually pushing ahead with plans to contest the outcome in court. While he's at it, however, the president-elect is busying himself with laying out the necessary framework for dealing with COVID-19, the most exigent of America's problems at the moment. The people are also talking about Kamala Harris, the California senator who will be vice president when she, alongside Mr. Biden, are inaugurated on January the 20th, 2021. The sheer historical significance of her run for the presidency, nomination as vice presidential candidate, and now journey into the immediate future as vice president of the United States, and most probably the future of the Democratic Party, has added another layer to the conversation on race relations and recognition of women as a real-time political force in America. Arise London correspondent Afua Adom, who earlier did the report on beauty brands inclusivity, joins us now. Good morning, Afua.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the morning show. Very quickly, Afua, what do you make of the outcome of the U.S. elections and President Trump's seeming incalcitrance? Although some people say he has a right to go to court, of course, but what do you make of it as someone who is in the UK looking at the American situation?
Well, what a week it was in politics last week. Sleepless for many of us. I think what's stark, first of all, about this election is the number of votes cast. Over 70 million for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but over 74 million for Joe Biden and his Democrats. And where we stand here on Monday morning is Joe Biden is set for the White House. As you mentioned, he is pushing forward with his plans for the next 4 years and getting ahead of, getting a head start and getting ahead of January 20th. Now, we know that he wants to take America back into the Paris Climate Change Agreement, but the most pertinent thing on his mind is, of course, COVID-19. He's setting up that coronavirus task force. It's going to be a 12-member task force, and that will be happening today. I think from a United Kingdom point of view, generally there seems to be a really positive reaction to the fact that Joe Biden is our president-elect. We're claiming him, but is the president-elect going forward. And of course, so suitably impressed by Kamala Harris being our first female vice president, our first black vice president, our first Indian, South Asian vice president. So many glass ceilings being broken there as well. So definitely a general sigh of relief on Saturday, much more sleep being gotten for journalists across the UK, and a sense of hope. I think what was missing from this election all the way through, to be honest, and I thought what was very different from Barack Obama's election in 2008 was a sense of hope. And I think as soon as that result started to come and was called around 5 p.m. our time here in the United Kingdom, it felt like hope came back, most definitely. And that is certainly being inspired by Joe Biden, but more so by Kamala Harris.
So I want to talk about that and what it means to you. You might recall in 1997, I'm not sure how old you are, by the way, when I was watching your really great bit on the beauty industry and black women, I wondered if you're old enough to remember when our only option was fashion fair. But I doubt that you are. You don't look old enough for that. But you'll recall in 1997, the amazing statue that was dug up after centuries of being buried in the basement of the U.S. Capitol. Can you imagine the horror? It was finally allowed to see the lights of day and put on display, the famous white marble statue of 3 suffragettes, Mott, Katie Statton, and Susan B. Anthony. And there's a 4th pillar that was not touched. And that 4th pillar, it is said, will bear the face of the first U.S. female president. And when I saw Kamala Harris take the stage in that ivory suit, I had goosebumps all over. Because we might have that pillar, a white pillar, be the face of a black woman. What are your thoughts about the emergence of Kamala Harris as the vice president-elect of the United States of America?
And wouldn't that be incredible to see Kamala Harris on that fourth pillar? Look, I do remember 1997 when fashion fair was our only option, you know, and we used to use talcum powder on our faces. When we talk about inclusivity in the beauty industry, it goes across all the board. Things have moved on so much in, 23 years since we could only use fashion fair, since we didn't have, a female VP or even women on the ticket who were thought to be successful. It just shows us how far we've come in every, in every part of life, from politics to beauty and everything in between. What's really pertinent and so important about Kamala Harris's nomination is, when we think about it, 100 years ago this year is when women first got the vote. And when Kamala Harris was born, black women couldn't even vote in the United States. Now, at 55 years later, she is female vice president. That is absolutely incredible. We know that black women have been so important in driving the vote. Lots been said about Stacey Abrams and the work that she has done in Georgia with the organization that she put together to stop voter suppression. She's been working in that state for 10 years, and we know that it is going to go to a recount, but so many more Democratic voters got up and voted in the state of Georgia, and the majority of them were black. And Joe Biden and both Kamala Harris in their acceptance speeches spoke about black people and black women and how important they are in organizing, in protesting, in voting, in campaigning. Black women started the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not a coincidence that black women in activism are so strong, but for so long they've been in the background, they've been the backbone, but now it's our time to be in the foreground. It's so important for black women to be able to see a black woman like themselves in a position of power, instead of always being in the background and being the backbone. Like I said, it's so important for all of us, but it's equally and probably more important for our young women, for our children, to see someone that looks like them in a position of power, and that really, really definitively says to them, you can be anything that you want to.
Right. I mean, while you were just talking about that great insight about the suffragettes, Tundu, I just started to reminisce, and I remembered women like Harriet Tubman and what they did for America and Rosa Parks. It looks like it's a generation of slavery. Harriet Tubman going through that. Then you had Rosa Parks. Now you have Kamala Harris. I mean, how can we start to plot that charge for the next generation of an average black woman born somewhere in Queens and the Bronx that knows that they can't do it and they believe in that doesn't still have access to education? Because education was a great factor in all of this. Kamala went to good schools. She could get to attorney positions on time and also run for the Senate on time and things like that. But you have a lot of black women in America that are still being undercut by education, no access to great education. How can we start to project for the next generation?
That's a very, very important point that you've made. When Kamala Harris made her speech, she said, I might be the first vice president, the first female vice president, but I won't be the last. And actually, that's a very, very big job that she's given herself, as well as being a representative. When she's in power, she has to make sure that she puts things in place to enable black women and women to come behind her. So that is improving chances of education for women in the United States, like you so rightly said, who might come from lower economic backgrounds. It's about increasing social mobility for all those women, whether they be black or white. It's a huge responsibility, and that is going to start with the grassroots. It's going to start with communities. It's going to start with much more advocacy for women to be able to access the education that they need to give them the opportunities, like Kamala had, like Michelle Obama had, to become the best that they can be and to unleash their potential. So actually, that is a huge responsibility for Kamala Harris, and something that she's going to have to take on on with gusto. We know that she's been accused perhaps of not being as progressive as some people would like. As her tenure as a prosecutor in California, she was seen to be quite harsh. She earned the nickname or the nick phrase sort of thing, Kamala is a cop. And so she wasn't as progressive as people would have liked. Now is our time to take up that mantle of progressiveness and to make sure that she does work in the grassroots, or instructs her government to do work within the grassroots, to do advocacy work, to do activism work, to make sure that Black women across the board are given the same opportunities that she had, no matter their economic background. And that is all about social mobility.
Well, Afua, you talked earlier on about hope, and that's a very strong word indeed. What kind of leadership should we expect from a President Biden, particularly with regard to style and the global leadership, which he alluded to in his first speech as president-elect?
I think what we can expect from Joe Biden is a return to unity, a return to a certain class of politics, a return to statesmanship. What we know about Joe Biden is we know how much tragedy has shaped his life and that he is very empathetic. And I think that will play well on a global stage, that he will be able to connect with global leaders and sort of take out the rhetoric from politics. He talked about unity in his speech. He talked about it not being a Republican or a democratic America, but a United States of America. And I think that is the kind of presidency that we can expect, because, like I said, 74 million people did vote for Joe Biden, but 70 million people didn't. That's only a 4 million, margin in between, and it means almost half the country didn't necessarily want him to be president. It's a very tight margin, and so he has a real uphill struggle. He has to be able to unify America and unify the government. Now, again, he's been someone who has been accused perhaps of not being as left as people would like, perhaps leaning to the right. He's very in the middle ground, and he, unfortunately, for more left and socialist parts of the Democratic Party, he is going to have to stay in the middle to be able to garner the whole of America. And that is exactly what America needs. It needs unity, and unity, like I said, can lead to hope. So I think we can expect a more pared down presidency, much less rhetoric, much less attacks on Twitter, much more diplomacy, and a much more of a kind of gentle hand to the presidency, something that perhaps we haven't seen for the past 4 years, but did see much more previously than that. And I think Joe Biden will serve definitely as a statesman, more of a statesman feel to the presidency, and that partly might be due to his age as well. Like we said, he is going to be the oldest president that America has ever had and will be in office after 4 years. So yes, a much more of a return to statesman-like politics.
We certainly hope so. And that quote of Kamala's that you said about being the first but not being the last reminded me of Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, and her famous quote that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. The whole idea is that when you get in the door, you don't turn around and lock it behind you, or you don't perform so disastrously, you ruin the chances of women following you. But my question for you is about who might be Joe Biden's Secretary of State. What kind of Secretary of State should he look for? Because when we talk about the president, we talk about the vice president, so much of global politics is shaped by the U.S. Secretary of State. So we're running out of time, so please, briefly, what kind of person do you think would emerge and fill that role?
That's a very good question. Now, I would like to see perhaps another female candidate in Secretary of State. And we know that Joe Biden, of course, is very open to that with his VP as Kamala Harris. You're absolutely right. When you talk about Secretary of State, someone who's going to go out there and represent America on the global stage. We know how, I think how well Hillary Clinton did in that role for 8 years, working alongside Barack Obama. There's so many names being thrown about this morning. morning, former Democratic candidates. Perhaps we can expect Elizabeth Warren, perhaps we can expect Pete Buttigieg in these roles. We certainly don't know at the moment, but you are going to need someone who is going to be very diplomatic on that world stage and is going to go out and perhaps repair a lot of relations and damage that previously had been done by a Trump administration. Someone who's going to perhaps be less about that America First rhetoric and more about globalization and working together with other countries. You need someone who's going to be able to, like I said, paper over those cracks and be able to repair those relationships. Perhaps another woman would be amazing to see in this government. And like you so rightly said, that Madeleine Albright quote, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. Let's hope that having Kamala Harris in office alongside Joe Biden can open many more doors for women and also women of colour to serve in this government.
Right. Real quickly, I just want to talk about another part to all of this. What do you think will be his approach to things like WTO and things like the World Health Organization and the Paris COP? Is there any move that Joe Biden will repeal all of that once he starts his administration?
Well, he's already said that when it comes to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, that the US will be joining that as soon as possible. So in January 21st, he will perhaps put an executive order for the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And it takes about another 30 days for the United States to actually rejoin it. And then they're back in the Climate Change Agreement. They will have some catching up to do because it hasn't been a priority for the last 4 years. But we do know that Joe Biden is very concerned about climate change and the issues around that. With World Health Organization, of course, like I said, Joe Biden is starting his 12-person coronavirus task force today. COVID-19 is the greatest health emergency facing us at this time. So I think we can expect greater cooperation with the WHO and the WTO when it comes to trade as well, because like I said, a lot of this presidency will be about undoing the damage that perhaps the Trump presidency has done over the past 4 years. A lot more rebuilding of those relationships and a lot more getting America back to a better standing on the world stage. But like I said, COVID-19 and climate change, big issues for Joe Biden at the top of his agenda. So we can expect much more cooperation with those organizations that represent those issues.
Well, Afua, Biden's presidency also raised a lot of hope and expectations across Africa. And, naturally, Africans are interested in whatever goes on in the U.S. Now, what do you think is likely to be the relationship with Africa under a Biden presidency? Should we expect changes, particularly with regard to immigration policies and aid?
That's a very good question. Now, Joe Biden has already said that one of the first things that he will do is take away the travel ban that relates to 7 Muslim countries, and definitely that will improve relations straight off the bat. I think when it comes to immigration and trade, again, Joe Biden, we know he has had some experience of working in Africa. He worked in Kenya. He'll be definitely much more open than a Trump administration to working with those countries whether it comes to trade or whether it comes to immigration. He's definitely seen as a bit more of a friend of the world, less of that harsh rhetoric. And so he's hoping that his presidency will inspire better relationships. We've already seen Muhammadu Buhari and Nana Akufo-Addo send their congratulations. Nana Akufo-Addo talked about how he was looking forward to working with America, building relations with Ghana, between America and Ghana. And we know they haven't necessarily been in the best place over the past 4 years. We can definitely, I think, expect visits to countries in Africa. And of course, I think Kamala Harris will be definitely very welcome as well. So definitely improved relations. Like I said, one of his top priorities again is removing that travel ban to the 7 Muslim countries that are in place at the moment. And that would definitely be a positive.
And what does Joe Biden mean for Brexit Britain?
And that is the £64 million question here at the moment. Now, Donald Trump and Boris Johnson were quite aligned in their ideas for Brexit. We know that Trump supported it, and of course Boris Johnson did as well. Joe Biden is not going to be great for Brexit Britain. There's definitely going to be some concerns within the Conservative government about the support for trade agreements that they may have going forward. We know that Joe Biden definitely supported Britain staying within the European Union, and he's not necessarily a great fan of Boris Johnson, and basically said that Boris Johnson was a bit of a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump. So definitely, unfortunately, a Brexit Britain can expect perhaps less support than we would have had from a Trump administration. But that's not to say that we hope perhaps that Boris Johnson and Joe Biden can find some common ground and to make those trade deals, because we always talk about the UK-US special relationship. It remains, we hope that it remains a special relationship going forward, and that deals can be struck for Britain, because come 31st of December, as our process continues with us leaving the European Union, it's definitely needed.
Well, thank you very much, Afua Adom, for joining us this morning on the morning show. Thank you.